One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's Bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Have you been wanting to start a podcast? You've been thinking about it. It feels right. You just know this is the next thing that my business needs. Well, I encourage you to sign up for my 5-day podcast bootcamp. This is a thing that you have been looking for. It is a 5-day video series where I walk you through exactly how to start, launch, and market your podcast. And I throw in some more information about planning strategies and being consistent and how you can make the most out of your podcast from day one. So sign up for our 5-day Create Your Podcast Bootcamp at crystalprofit.com/podcast bootcamp. And do it already. You know that you've been wanting to, so just bite the bullet and join us. Okay, so in the honor, does that even make sense? In the practice? Is that the phrase I'm looking for? I don't know. But in full transparency, I had a totally different topic planned to talk about today. But then I realized how important this episode, I bumped this up. This was going to be going into next month. And I was like, nope, I got to talk about this because I see people asking this question and we need to talk about it. So let's talk about what to have in your podcast trailer episode. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Because if you've been thinking about creating a podcast for a while, well, I'm so glad you found this show. Think of this as the shortcut / time-saving version of searching Google and YouTube for hours and hours trying to figure out the world of podcasting. Trust me, as a busy mama of 3, I get it. You don't have a lot of time to be spent or wasted, I should say, searching the web, trying to find all the right ideas and all the amazing things that are out there, and you just end up overwhelmed. Trust me, I've been there, done that, took home the souvenir. But this podcast is going to help you in practical ways because twice a week we'll be delivering episodes that are going to give you steps to help you create a podcast your audience can't wait to listen to. So let's get right to it, shall we? So like I said in the beginning, I've seen lots of questions about what to have in your podcast trailer, and I have some ideas and thoughts, but first, what the heck is a podcast trailer, right? Like if you have no idea, if you have not launched your podcast, if you have landed here and you're like, I've heard of this, but I don't really know what it is, let's start there. Okay, so first of all, your podcast trailer, the easiest way to explain it is think of it like a movie trailer, right? Like you go to the movies, you sit down. I personally love previews. I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh, we'll get there like 20 minutes after the movie starts because they hate the preview. I love the previews. I want my butt in that movie chair with my popcorn or my chocolate almonds, whichever, whatever I'm feeling that day. And I want to watch every single preview. Does that make me weird? I don't know. I don't care because I love a good movie trailer. Oh my gosh. And whatever. So that's basically what this is. It is your podcast trailer, just like your movie trailer. It is what you are actually putting out before your podcast launches. And I know you probably immediately have questions. Well, how long should it be? What does it need? Like all these things are going through your mind right now. Don't worry. We're going to get to that. But I want you to understand the importance of your podcast trailer. So let's do a little like behind the scenes technicalities of how your podcast actually works. So if you have not launched, this episode is mostly for you. If you've already launched your podcast, then pass this along to someone who's thinking about launching. But I want to talk about your podcast trailer. And this is the audio file that you are going to use to get your podcast connected to all the directories where you want your podcast to show up. So what do I mean by that? So you have your podcast hosting site, right? Like maybe you've been recording your audio files and you have some MP3s and some WAV files. So you're like, okay, essentially this is my podcast. What do I do to get it like actually out in front of people? Well, you have to have a podcast hosting site, and you can go to the show notes and I'm going to link to all the things about podcast hosting sites. I use Buzzsprout. They are phenomenal. They are like the only one that I recommend because it's the only one I've ever used. I've never had to go with anybody else. So I recommend Buzzsprout for podcast hosting. But then what they do is you upload your audio file to their website, and then they are the ones that send it out to Google Play, Spotify, like all the places that you want your podcast to show up. They are the ones that send out your feed to all of those places. That is how podcasting works. Every week, I upload my files, and then they send, even this episode, what I have right now, I'm recording it. It's going to be an MP3, and then I'm going to upload it to Buzzsprout, and then it gets shoved out to all the places and wherever you're listening to this podcast. But there is an initial setup process that has to happen in order for you to get connected to Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, all the places we just talked about. And what I tell my clients and my students is they should have a podcast trailer, because this takes the pressure off of you putting out your very first episode before you quote unquote launch. I'm doing my air quotes like you can see me. That's why I said quote unquote. But you have your launch date. We've talked about launch dates before. We've talked about launch goals. We've talked about your podcast launch plan. I'm going to link to all of those episodes in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 129. You can find all these previous ones. If you're just like, wait, Crystal, I just walked into the room. You're throwing things at me. Don't worry. It's going to be in the show notes. You can go check them out there. But your podcast trailer is a shorter version of what your actual episodes will be. So now what do you include? Okay, look, we're moving along. Okay, we're taking baby steps here. So we've talked about what a podcast trailer actually is. Now we're going to talk about what should you have inside of it. So there's like 4 main things and there's a few optional. So the 4 main things is you need to have when your podcast is actually launching, when your podcast launch date. You need to include that. You need to include what listeners can expect, either the value that you're going to add to their lives, or you're going to make them laugh, you're going to make them cry, you're going to entertain them, you're going to motivate them, inspire them, whatever. You need to have that in there, a compelling reason for them to come back and listen when you actually launch. Who the podcast is for, that's the third one. So when your podcast is launching, what listeners can expect, who the podcast is for, like specifically call out. Like I say, this podcast is for entrepreneurs. If you're listening to this and you're not an entrepreneur, that's cool. But I created this podcast to talk to entrepreneurs, people with a small business, people, creating a business, like they're doing it. Most of you have an online business. A lot of you do. Some of you have brick and mortar, some of you have products, but a lot of you are entrepreneurs. So I want you to call that out in your podcast trailer. So when someone's listening to your trailer and you say bakers, but they are motocross racers, they're like, oh, this one is not for me, right? Like they can self-identify this. I probably won't find a lot of joy in this podcast. So just take that into consideration. And then the other thing, the fourth thing is how often you're going to put out new episodes. And this is kind of one of those optional ones because you don't have to put it out there because you may change your mind. You may say, well, I thought I was going to do a weekly podcast, like one podcast every week, but I decided to do, oh my gosh, y'all, Wally is in here. Wally's my Boston Terrier, and he just snorted so loud. So I wanted y'all to know that was not me. That was the dog that snorted really loud. Y'all probably didn't even hear it, but I had to, that was disclaimer. That was not me making a terrible noise. Anyway, so how often you're going to put episodes out? If you're going to do it once a week, if you're going to do it 3 times a week, if you're going to do it once a month. I don't recommend you do it once a month, by the way. I think you should do it once a week at the bare minimum. But I think that you should have it in there. So if I were to do a trailer for this podcast, I would say something to the tune of, I'm launching on January 1st, 2020. I know that date's in the past, but okay, I've already launched this podcast, so I'm just making all of this up anyway. What listeners can expect from me, they can expect to learn how to confidently start, launch, and market their podcast. And who is this podcast for? I'm speaking to entrepreneurs. How often do I put out episodes? I put out episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. Everything that I just said there was probably about 15 to 20 seconds. I mean, even with all the other stuff in between, it might have been even shorter than that. But do you see what I'm getting at here? It doesn't have to be the lifelong saga of why you decided to create a podcast and all the things that you could ever explain in the first, like, you don't want to scare people off, guys. I think that's like, I've seen some podcast trailers that are crazy long, 30 minutes to an hour. And like somebody is just bearing their entire soul to this potential audience. And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of like the movie trailer that you see where you're just confused. You're like, was that a comedy? Was that a horror movie? Like, what is happening? Was that supposed to be happy? Because they made like kind of a joke that I don't know that I agreed with. Was he being passive? Like what? I don't even know what's happening. Okay. And that is not what you want your potential listeners. You don't want their reaction to be like that. You want them to be like, man, that podcast that is for bakers, that is coming out in 3 weeks. And I cannot wait because she told me that she was going to tell me how I can save time in the kitchen and how I can save money on my grocery bill and how I can, properly store things and keep my pantry stocked and use these really cool utensils and pans and tips and tricks and stuff, like all the things. I'm so excited for this baking podcast. I actually don't know anybody with a baking podcast, but that would be really like, send me recommendations if you know somebody, because I love to bake. I don't need to because we have we have some people with some sugar sweet tooths in this house, and they can't say no to just one cookie. I am not one of those people. I actually like to bake, but all the other humans in my family love to consume all of the sweets. So we have to keep it at a minimum in this house. But do you see what I'm saying? I want you to be very clear with your podcast trailer, who it's for and all the things. So let's talk about the length. I had kind of hinted at how long it should be. So who I think did this super well, and I recently talked about this at the Spark conference that we recently had. I love to talk about the Office ladies and how they launched their podcast. And I took a picture because I don't even know if it's out. They might have deleted their trailer episode. I don't know, but it was 30 seconds. Their trailer episode was 30 seconds, and they shared it out on social media, and I almost had a heart attack. Like, this was about 3 to 4 weeks before the actual podcast was coming out. I have a screen. I'm super nerd, guys, and I'll put this in the show notes, but I'm a super nerd, and I have a screenshot from September 25th, 2019, of when I first saw that their podcast was coming out. And their trailer episode, they had one that was about 30 seconds and one that was about 3 minutes. And so the first one was like, hey guys, this is when it's coming out. And then the next one was more of like, hey, we wanted to work together. We wanted to do something fun. This is what you can expect. So they kind of did 2 trailer episodes leading up to it because they can do that, I guess. I didn't care. I listened to one of them twice. Oh my gosh. I'm like total Office freak here, guys. So I love this. This is my favorite podcast that I listen to every single week. But it doesn't have to be really long. I've seen them from 30 seconds to 15 minutes. I think that it just depends on your own personal preference. And if this is something that's going to kind of hold you back from getting started, like if you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do all this prep work for my trailer episode. No, we're not going to fret about this. This is the easy part. This is just something that you need to have in order to get your podcast connected from your hosting site to all of the directories where you want your podcast to show up. So we're not going to stress about this. If this is like you're already worried about, I've got to come up with 3 to 5 episodes. I'm just trying to batch content. I'm just trying to get ready. I'm trying to get a marketing plan, all the things, Crystal. I don't have time for this. Make it very easy then. 30 seconds. Boom. Done. Okay? Make it very simple for you. I don't want this to stress you out. I want this to be an easy transition into the world of podcasting and not something that stresses you out from the beginning, because we're not about that life, okay? We are about making podcasting fun. We are about doing it with confidence, and we are about showing up every single week, being consistent. And if you are stressing about a podcast trailer, then we are starting off on the wrong foot, okay? So if having a longer trailer episode feels right to you, then do that. Maybe you want to have an explanation episode. That way, when you start launching and you putting out 2 or 3 episodes or 3 to 5 episodes, when you actually launch, you can just like hit the ground running and launch your episodes where you don't have to explain anything. Like everything is just, you're just going. I'm just going with the flow. I just want to, speak my mind. More power to you. But if you're a little hesitant and you're like, I still have to figure all this out, that's okay too. So whatever your preference is, that's what you should go with. But the last thing I want to talk about is I had a question recently where someone said, well, should I keep my trailer episode? Like after I launch, is it even necessary for it to be out there? And I just think that this depends. I don't think that there's a right and wrong answer. I can tell you from my personal experience, after I rebranded my podcast, I changed my trailer episode. So what you hear now is not my original episode. And that is because I know when a lot of people find a podcast for the first time, they will go all the way to the beginning. Even if a podcast has hundreds of episodes, they will go all the way back to the very beginning, the genesis moment that this podcast came into creation. And I didn't want people to be confused because I did not go back and change all of my previous episodes. I just simply recorded a trailer episode and was like, hey guys, by the way, if you're confused why some of these episodes are different, they have a different name, or, the flow seems different, here's why. And that's what I said, because I wasn't going to go back and change 45 episodes of the podcast just so I looked professional or legitimate. Ain't nobody got time for that. No, we're moving on with our lives. So you can feel free if you don't want it there. If you do have a short 30-second, it's just the facts. We're launching on this date. We're launching this time. Here's what you can expect. Can't wait for you to listen. Leave a review. Subscribe on day one. Boom, done. Then delete it after it's done. You can do that in your hosting site. Go in, delete the file. You're done. Or you can replace it. This is totally up to you. There's no, like I said, right or wrong answer to this. But I do think that, if it's something that you don't want out there after you've been podcasting a while, you're like, I don't really like that, delete it. You're not going to hurt anything. Nothing's going to break if you delete your podcast trailer. But that's all I have for you today, guys. So let's just recap real fast. We covered what a podcast trailer is, why you need it, because you need it to get connected to all the podcast directories. We talked about what to include, how long it should be, and if you should even keep it after you've launched. So I would love to know your thoughts and ideas on this. So if you are brand new, please subscribe to the show so you get updates every single week. We put out episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. So I want you to get notified every single week. And I'm working on some super secret bonus episodes that I will not talk about outside of this orifice. See, that's like a nod to totally The Office. If you're an Office fan, you get it. And then you're just like, oh my gosh, Crystal really is a super nerd, super dork. But I have some really cool things planned that are coming up in the next few weeks, and you will only get notified about them if you are subscribed to this show. If you have not left us a rating or review, I would so appreciate it, because that is how we push this podcast out into front of more entrepreneurs. That way they can learn how to start, launch, and market their podcast. But like I said earlier, you can find all of the episodes that we mentioned at crystalprofit.com/episode 129. I'm going to have all the previous ones that we talked about here today. And that's it, guys. So keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners, thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.